Joining me today, of course, is going to be the specialist of the idea of where XRP and maybe the idea of a reset could all be brewing. And that, of course, is Black Swan Capitalist with Verzan and Vendel joining me again. How are you guys?
Doing well. Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, thank you for having us
No,
on again.
here we are going into the end of the year. Everybody thought we would be in a different position. You know, when you look at the cycles and the narratives that seem to go out over and over, and we're continuing to see news kind of just blow up in general around crypto and I think in blockchain. One of the things that hit here just this week, of course, is Jamie Dimon launching a $100 million tokenized fund, which is going to be residing on Ethereum. I'll share my screen here just to give you guys kind of the storyline here. But the idea that Jamie Dimon is going in this direction after being somewhat anti-crypto, well, very anti-crypto for quite some time. What do you make of this? Do you feel like this is finally a validation of blockchain, or is this more of, I'm going to use this tool to extract more, juice from the market? What do you think, Prasan?
Certainly an extraction of wealth here. There's no doubt a consolidation going on. And if they're going to use any mechanism they need to extract as much wealth from spectators who truly don't understand what the ecosystem is doing, how it's evolving. If you go back to 2020, 21, when we had the SEC lawsuit versus Ripple, there is direct confirmation that JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and all these large institutions playing both sides were adopting Ripple's infrastructure, but at the same time pushing out a different narrative. So it makes you wonder. Right. They were involved in the whole ETHgate scandal too, which is a whole different subject we don't have to get into, but those who have been doing the research certainly are up to speed on all of this. So I think it is truly a mechanism to just get more spectators involved and, of course, to drive more people to put their money on the blockchain overall. And later on down the road, I think you're going to have a consolidation that falls into compliance, which is another subject we could talk about, the OCC and so forth. But that's my take on it. Wouldn't trust JP Morgan. And if they're telling everybody that this is what we're doing, they're probably doing something else.
I want to thank our sponsor today, and that is Uphold, where you guys can earn crypto better. A lot of things happening with Uphold staking rewards. So you can stake up to 20 different cryptocurrencies and get into the reward side of things. New tokens, early access, along with full transparency. This is one of the best platforms out there to make trades on when it comes to crypto. The other thing you guys should be doing is this right here. Get the card, the XRP rewards card, which comes in the form of an Uphold debit card. And the nice thing about this, guys, is you can do this without a credit check. Also get up to 6% back on all your purchases for the first 3 months. You can get up to 10% back with a direct deposit stacked in on this. So this is one of the best values out there when it comes to a debit card where you can get into your digital assets. Make sure and check out Uphold. Use the link down below. Let them know we sent you. Yeah. So it's not look over here, but we're busy over here. Okay, so let's kind of go down that rabbit hole for a second before we get into, because we are going to talk about Ripple's banking license being somewhat approved by the OCC and what that means, because there's a lot of miscommunication, I think, out there, to your point, on what the real status is of this banking license. But before I go there, you mentioned not only BlackRock but also JP Morgan and the concept of what we've been talking about for quite some time, and that is this potential for a monetary and global repositioning. We'll call it the reset that everybody's been kind of pointing to. Putin came on, accused, or I shouldn't say Putin, but his friends over there came on and said the U.S. is starting to utilize stablecoins to basically come in and deal with their debt in a way in which the debt would essentially kind of be not necessarily wiped off, but definitely diminished considerably. With what Trump is doing right now, especially when you look at the components of the acceleration of blockchain by not only Wall Street, but also by the government entities, we'll get into Clarity Act here in a second, and the global pressure overall, Vandel, do you think that this is finally the administration that is going to attempt to try to reposition the global infrastructure when it comes to the monetary system?
Yes, I do. But the misconception is that they're going to try to wipe out the debt with these mechanisms in place.
like stable.
Yeah, it's not. The whole point of stable coins is, well, there's a few different reasons why they even launch them, but primarily one of them is to create a captive buyer for U.S. Treasuries, U.S.
Yep.
debt. The reason they need that is simply because if they don't have enough buyers, you'll have a bond market issue and the financial system could collapse on its own weight. So what they're doing is artificially creating permanent buyers for U.S. Treasuries, and essentially because for every stablecoin issuer that does issue a stablecoin, they need to acquire an equivalent ratio of U.S. debt, U.S. Treasuries. So ultimately, that's one of the main goals with the stablecoins. It's not going to. So this whole idea of the Russians suggesting that it's an attempt to wipe off their debt or diminish
Just transferring who has it.
Yes.
Which is going to end up being all the stablecoin companies.
Yeah, but
instead of Japan.
Yeah, but they're not going to wipe out the debt. They can't. The debt-based system won't allow it, and they wouldn't even be able to accomplish that even if they tried. Essentially, they created a system that we're at the point where we're at no point of return. Essentially, so they're backed into a corner, and they have to create strategical solutions to keep the can rolling until something fundamentally breaks that traditional Fed policy and monetary tools will not be able to fix. And then they'll introduce some solution after the money printer is no longer a viable solution. So that's coming in the future. It's inevitable because the system was designed to collapse at some point. It's a debt-based system. More credit creation, more debt creation. Interest just keeps exploding. They have to keep refinancing the debt. Now, there's no exact ceiling of when that will happen, but ultimately it's going to translate to higher inflation eventually, and that will continue into hyperinflation. It would get to a point where at some point, if inflation is too high and you have a disrupted economy because of robotics, AI, high inflation, cost of living, then essentially people are going to come out with the pitchforks. And at that point, they're going to have to introduce some new solution. The question is, how are they going to introduce it? We don't know. Obviously, they're going to create some catalyst, some narrative to cover up what's really going on. And that's a underlying issue at the core of the financial system, which ties into the bond market. And they're trying to preserve the bond market integrity, essentially, and keep the system going. And stable coins is the solution for that.
Well, and to your point, you could be luring in a solution for UBI, which of course could still become stablecoin. We already know what FedNow has been able to integrate in a short term. I imagine, what is that going to look like in 12 months or 18 months? Back to your point, Versan, around a potential for a CBDC and how this might play out. You mentioned something though, Vandal, that I think is interesting to talk about. That is this idea, not only the debt structure being kind of reformatted, who's going to own that debt, how that's going to play into the next few years, but we had a private investor group meeting this last weekend over here in Palm Beach. And there were several analysts in there that basically said, without saying it directly, is that we are going to see an unbelievable acceleration into this particular cycle of QE.
Yeah.
And they tell a little bit about the 40 billion. They talk a little bit about the 40 billion that was masked as maintenance, and that they're going to try to mask this as maintenance for as long as they can and then accelerate into it, which could get into the hyperinflation concern that you guys have talked about before. When you think about that, Versan, this would be a huge acceleration into the market, which usually is good for risk assets. How do you think this plays out next year?
Well, the minute the Fed announced that they were going to buy $40 billion worth of T-bills, it became very clear that they need to expand their balance sheet. And what does that tell us? It means they're going to inject more liquidity into the system. Maybe governments don't want to do it, but it's the only solution they have. I think they are going to do it, obviously. For the bulls and the bears, it means they're going to print so much money. Okay, when you inject this kind of amount of liquidity into the ecosystem, asset prices are going to rise significantly. And because of this mechanism, I do think it's part of the wealth consolidation as well. The more money they print, the more inflation you're going to have. The one percenters, they always get the money at the top. They're going to buy up all the assets while creating these inflationary pressures, which are going to put more pressure on the middle class to have to sell their assets. And that's typically how they consolidate wealth.
Yeah.
Now, because of this, I do believe gold and other hard assets across the board are going to rise significantly. In my opinion, the real war happening behind the headlines of everything we see today in monetary policy, which I think is really just a distraction, is to ultimately fight for the world's natural resources.
Interesting. So your thinking is that gold becomes a very clear movement here. And I just wonder if we are in a look over here method right now, because the US government highly focused on digital asset right now. You've got China, India, and most of the EU focusing on gold to a certain extent, Russia even to a certain extent. The mechanism in which that's being done, and we're going to probably see tokenized gold accelerate even more with what we've seen with just Tether and Paxos here recently. And now Paxos has a banking license as well. So interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely a relationship between the tokenized ecosystem, the digital ecosystem, and hard assets overall.
Yeah.
We don't know how the structure is really going to play out, but I do believe that there is a relationship between, for instance, the XRP and gold not being backed literally, but aligned through the settlement and liquidity purposes.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that does get into the whole point of what Ripple has done, and has been trying to do over the last 18 months with all these acquisitions. One thing to note here, guys, is that let me bring up the tweet from Brad. This was what he announced on Friday. And of course, I think it kind of caught everybody a little bit off guard because it's been kind of brewing for a while. And that was Ripple just received the conditional approval for the USOCC, which is the charter for Ripple National Trust and Bank. So mainly what this means is it gets them a license to become a bank for institutions, essentially. This is kind of the big difference. The question is, because this is moving from a speculation phase that they've been involved in to an infrastructure phase, because this license isn't about pumping price tomorrow. It's really about kind of cementing XRP and RLUSD as a federally regulated stable settlement rail. So if you've got a federally regulated settlement rail, then you look at this historic run on gold right now of what we're seeing. It almost gets into this point of this whole idea of anti-fiat in general. And this conditional approval, this starts to change things up a lot in terms of what this could look like in the short term for Ripple, but definitely in the long term. What do you make of this? Do you feel like this is just one more stepping stone for Ripple to try to position? Either one of you can take that.
I'll keep it short. Ripple has been gradually consolidating the global financial system, whether people see it or not, little by little. It's being accomplished quietly behind the scenes. For those doing the research, it's quite obvious. So getting a license at this stage, sure, it's another milestone, but it really gives Ripple a badge. It changes how it can operate moving forward. And now it allows them to function like a traditional US bank that is indeed fully regulated, XRP also not being the security. This kind of just greenlights the process for institutional adoption. Like you said, it's an institutional bank, not so much for the everyday people.
Retail, yeah.
Retail, exactly, right. This now opens the door for institutional custody solutions, which is trillions of dollars. And of course, the issuance now of regulated stablecoins and so forth. And I think this is just another legal framework where how basically Ripple is going to integrate XRP and other digital assets for sure into the broader financial system at scale at this point.
Yeah. Well, this is direct settlement because this is obviously going to move Ripple closer to really the holy grail, which is kind of the Federal Reserve master account. If they get that, then they could settle directly with the Fed, bypassing a lot of these banks. And then XRP becomes the bridge asset in a federally recognized loop.
Yes. I mean, you have the macro and micro convergence at this point. You have monetary policy, you have regulatory clarity, and then digital asset utility. There was a video that came out the other day of some gentleman on stage on a panel, and he said, we're at a point where we need real digital assets that have a use case for the people. Right?
Bingo. Yeah.
So, I hate to sound repetitive, but I do think it's necessary. It's just we're at a point where we're not just waiting for regulatory clarity anymore. In fact, we're living through regulatory and monetary cycles that are going to produce this clarity. And that kind of changes everything.
Well, and there's a rotation happening right now, this safe haven rotation. It's why you're seeing what we're seeing with silver and gold, money obviously currently flowing into gold and those kinds of precious metals, and to some extent, even treasuries. But this, I think, is still looking at, are we going to see a potential difficulty in terms of hyperinflation, which is where we will see monetary release from the Fed. But this pretty much poises XRP to kind of catch the liquidity. Once that we see a sentiment return on risk assets. Is there anything that could play into this where XRP and gold become, flight to safety assets away from what we've seen in the traditional finance side?
Vendel, would you like to put your input? I mean, I've been covering the whole gold XRP thing for a long time.
Give me that, man.
Well, I do think gold and XRP, again, are going to be related in some way, form, or fashion. Yeah. Again, not literally, but aligned with gold's role through, again, settlement and liquidity. If you look at the XRP mechanism, it mirrors gold in certain aspects, right? If it's designed for cross-border payments at the institutional level, that means trillions of dollars in value, the same way gold historically anchored international settlement. Now, if you see central banks and financial institutions start to move trillions that are adopting the rails that Ripple is providing, RippleNet, that's the infrastructure, then the only logical conclusion is that when the financial system fully integrates with physical commodities, and that's the real architecture here, XRP becomes the liquidity layer for leverage. But under Basel III, gold, once again, is going to anchor the system. So you're going to need some sort of digital counterpart that is capable of carrying the weight and extreme high valuations for settlement internationally. You're going to have a new financial infrastructure for a multipolar world, and that's going to require agnostic assets like gold. And in the digital ecosystem, you have XRP. So maybe we're wrong, maybe we're early, but it's very clear.
Do you think we're early, Vendel?
Well, in terms of the disruptive technological revolution that we're living through, yes, we're in the infancy stages. Throughout all historical technological revolutions, they go through different stages within their cycle. And certainly this one is actually comparable to, you could even say, the early 90s of the internet and tech bubble. Now, essentially, I do see us still in the infancy stages of this mainstream adoption, utility actually coming into light and being adopted by institutions. But the way you know that we're in the infancy stage still is because, first of all, we don't have full regulations and clear frameworks. That's one clear signal that's obvious compared to even previous industrial revolutions. That's one. The second is anybody can go in their mother's garage and create a meme coin on Pump Fund. Okay, if we were in a maturity phase, first of all, you wouldn't have that. You'd have the clear regulations in place, strict criteria that you have to go through in order to even list a cryptocurrency, and there would be more transparency. Additionally, you would actually see, just like today, pretty much everybody and their mother and businesses have access to internet and have a smartphone. That's essentially the maturity phase of the internet and tech. Now, we're clearly not there yet because most people have no idea what crypto even is or what a digital asset is. They don't even know what a token is. Most businesses are not even interested in it. It's just the leading corporations and institutions that are trying to front run it. So essentially, we're in the infancy stage in terms of utility and mainstream adoption.
Well, I look at it this way. There's two things. One, of course, you see these dramatic bell curves start to grow in the early age of the internet. We saw it in the mid 90s to 2000, which was really when it exploded. The difference of that cycle and what we're seeing now, of course, it wasn't finance. And if you look at the comparison of where gold really accelerated, you got to go back to, I think it was 1970 to 1980, where gold went from like $30 to over $800 an ounce. And I mean, that was like a 2,300% gain over a decade. And again, that was during the stagflation years, which is when we saw just ridiculous interest rates. It was out of control. Many people think that's where we're heading right now. And that's why we're seeing this pre-move on gold, which has been outperforming the S&P this year. Could that stretch into 2026 if we can continue to see that? Versan, you're nodding your head there, so I'm sure you have something to say on that.
I think gold is going to climb significantly higher, and you have to factor in the geopolitical tensions, whether it be staged or not. It doesn't matter. It sets the precedent for a higher gold price. And, you know,
I love how you just say whether it be staged.
I mean, you know,
Well, that's a big statement. So let's go a little deeper there. Let's go a little deeper because I know you got a lot to say about
I
that.
think politics is all theatrics at this point. I don't pay
Yeah.
attention to it as much as I used to when I was still learning this, but I see what's going on in the world. There's a massive wealth consolidation. There's constantly some controlled opposition on both sides to keep people distracted from the real moves happening behind the scenes. And here's a few of them. Gold is going to anchor the next financial system. You're going to have a two-tier class. We've covered this before.
Yep.
In 2022, when I was paying attention to the Bank for International Settlements, I was discussing this with Andy Schechtman, you're very close to.
Yep.
And it became very clear that they were building a two-tier monetary system. These were their words, not mine. They were going to have private money, central bank money, essentially central bank reserves, which in my opinion is gold, XRP, some relationship there.
Mm-hmm.
The IMF openly stated that gold would be anchoring the new financial system. And then they were going to have a private cryptocurrency. I'm sorry, not private, retail cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And who's at the forefront of issuance of banking the unbanked? It's Stellar.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
And I have documents here that it's actually Stellar who's building the stablecoin issuance for central bank digital currencies, banking the unbanked after they bankrupt the whole world. So again, the whole theatrics of politics, it's to keep you distracted. I see them building an entirely new kind of financial system. And what they're doing is intentionally stalling the regulation to create more confusion.
Yeah.
And I see this every day with our clients as well. And that's
Do you
proof
think
of it.
we're close to, okay, so let's talk about clarity because we're going to have Davidson on, Warren Davidson, who's a big proponent of crypto in general this week. And my question to him will be the fact that there's been a constant rug pull by the banks and the bank lobbies that have continued to try to initiate changing I shouldn't say the narrative, the language of what clarity was originally designed to do. Even trying to pull in elements from the Genius Act which was basically restricting companies from being able to generate yield. So do you feel like the Clarity Act is going to get passed, but with a lot of caveats? Or do you think it's just going to get stretched out next year?
Stretched out.
Yeah,
okay. This is how they play the game. They're going to stretch it out. They're going to play controlled opposition. Same way they did with the Genius Act. And by the way, the Genius Act, there's stablecoin issuance in there too. I'm sorry, central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
You could disguise it however you'd like. But yes, I think they're going to drag it out.
Well, this gets into the point that we talked about on the pre-show is that a lot of people may say, well, they're not going to get CBDCs in this, but essentially what they've embraced dramatically is the stablecoin ecosystem. And if you layer in these private companies, eventually there'll be more public companies like Circle, and then you layer in companies like Palantir, which essentially could easily start to integrate with companies like Circle, then essentially you have a CBDC because you have a technology that's capable of making the kind of influence on blockchain technology where you could get to the point where you could turn off a wallet. That's
part
will.
It's part of a debt trap here, but ultimately a stablecoin is a digital representation of a fiat currency, which is a central bank liability. That's all you need to confirm that it's a CBDC.
Yeah.
It's issued by a central bank. It's backed by U.S. debt or debt.
Yep.
And it's all remotely being controlled through the rails. So you can turn off someone's bank account if they disagree with the president's rules or something along those lines or political views. It's that simple.
So we had gold out. You're wanting to hit on something there, Vandell. You want to hit on?
Yeah, I was just going to say the truth is stable coins are disguised for it's a disguise of a CBDC. That's really what it is because it has the same hallmarks, the same characteristics, the same surveillability and programmable aspects that probably aren't here today, but they have the ability, it's built into it, where they could evolve that and eventually roll out those more nefarious Orwellian features and properties. At the end of the day, it's the same thing. Right now, what they're doing is a psyop. It's strategical, psychological warfare at this point. If people didn't want the CBDC, they got a lot of negative pushback from it. Okay, take their eyes off that, put the spotlight on something that looks like it's overpowering the CBDC and it's better than it. It's not a CBDC, guys. Don't worry. Relax, just suck on your lollipop. Everything's fine. Your savior's here. We fixed everything. We got
Okay, so
stable
you've got
coins
gold
now. It has the same characteristics.
Exactly.
It's
You've
like
got
it's
gold
such a joke.
outperforming the S&P.
Yep.
Yeah. Tell me how you really feel there, Randall.
Well, it's the truth. I mean, we look at the data, so not the
Yeah,
headline.
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we're seeing more and more of it. I think a lot of this now, people are starting to, I did a show last week where I was just so fed up. Everybody, from a comment standpoint, because normally I'm very calm and collected.
You're very
It's kind
collected.
of like you, Rasan. You're getting to a point where it's like, are you kidding me? Can this be any more in your face than what we're seeing right now? The problem is that most people, 98%, are just walking zombies and have no clue of what is really going on right now. So
Yeah,
you look
that's
at
the truth.
gold.
Yep.
Yeah, you look at gold outperforming the S&P this year, and you see the strategy that is going toward potentially a reset that could be happening in plain sight. Do you think we'd ever run the conditional situation that we ran to in Bretton Woods where they made it illegal to hold gold?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. But if you think about it, governments will usually become more authoritarian when they lose control of the narrative or if they lose control, right? That's pretty much what happened before. It's very possible with all this technological advancements now that you could trace a transaction very easily if you're buying gold from, let's say, JM Bullion, right?
Yeah.
And you're using your debit card. There's a proof of that transaction. So if it was necessary, they could do it. That's why I encourage all our clients to buy gold with cash. That way there's no digital trace because we don't really know. So I buy all my metals with cash. I carry lots of cash because I can use it to buy things with anonymity. If you think about it, the most decentralized form of payment was cash.
Yeah.
Now we're going into something and calling it decentralized when it's clearly not. So I really don't have an answer to that, but it's very possible. Or they can simply reset the gold price.
Well, that's the big one. That's what everybody believes. I know Andy talks about that a lot with me, is that he believes that there's going to be at some point just a revaluation on where gold is going.
Mm-hmm.
How do you pull that off? Because if you're the United, now granted, our value of gold, I think what was it in Fort Knox? Our average value is like $40 an ounce right now or something. What's the narrative there versus where it is today?
All I know is you need to hold some.
Yeah, the central banks don't really want people acquiring gold. That's the truth.
Yeah.
They want to divert your attention, have you focus on different assets, have you focus on acquiring digital assets. But the truth is, since 2009, they've been net buyers of tangible gold, and that has been breaking records pretty much for several years now. And the path is that trajectory hasn't changed, and it goes back to my brother's point, which you fundamentally understand as well, because the IMF made it very clear that the new system will have to have some gold anchor or ratio that will be pegged to it in some shape or form. And essentially, if they're buying all this gold since 2009, ironically, interestingly, when Bitcoin was launched, if they're buying all this gold at record levels, and we're going digital into a digitized economy where everything's going to be tokenized, then why would they be buying physical gold? And the only logical conclusion is because it's going to play a critical role in this new digital system that we're heading towards. It's just plain simple logic,
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So it's important to just be mindful of that.
Yeah, but also historical context too. To your point, Rindo. Yeah. Every time you have a reset, you always see a return to gold. And that's simply because it has no counterparty risk. There's no expiration date, et cetera, and no liability. So it's the only form of money that will survive any monetary transition. When you start connecting the dots and cross-referencing the research, entering this new monetary paradigm, you see that gold is again becoming the base layer of trust. And digital assets, XRP being the bridge.
Exactly.
For flow of value between these markets and emerging economies and so forth.
Well, you look at the growth of what we've seen already with tokenized gold, and I still think we are at the very beginning of truly seeing tokenized gold. Tokenized silver we don't really even have available. Obviously, the supply issue is the biggest problem there with silver. But tokenized gold, and then you look at the potential of the privacy tokens, and I just wonder if a privacy token at some point is going to be tied to a hard asset like gold, whether it's a correlation or some sort of treasury against it, something in the way that we could see a privacy token rise out of this narrative going forward. Because back to your point is, I think that most of the people that are buying gold right now, at some point, if they start to lock, is there going to be something else in which you could use, as a means of exchange? And I think that's the real question as we start to see whether it's stable coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, some of these other tokens out there that play into this. Where do you think Bitcoin plays a role, if at all, in this ecosystem?
Well, go ahead, Bindo, please.
Yeah, hit it.
Well, Bitcoin, it seems, based on our research and just monitoring the cycles, keeping track of it, and really diving very deep and doing our due diligence on it, is pretty much to serve multiple purposes simultaneously. One of them is to actually steal wealth from uninformed investors coming in late and then transfer it up to the large Bitcoin holders, because that's what they've been doing every cycle since 2009. Of course, if you get in early, you make a ton of money. If you don't panic sell at the wrong time, and if you get out early. So it's a wealth creation vehicle, but it's also being used as a wealth transfer vehicle for large Bitcoin holders. And it's interesting because about 2%, over 70% of the Bitcoin supply is actually controlled by a little over 2% whale wallets. So it's actually, the technology is decentralized in nature, but within a centralized game, pretty much. Yes, Bitcoin, it's very difficult to say whether it's going to be, sticking around in the future or not. Personally, we don't think it's going to play any critical role in the new financial system.
Interesting.
We don't see that happening. I think it was the perfect setup to lure in people and pave the way for a digital financial system. And that's essentially what it did. And here we are today. And of
Where
course,
does all that wealth go then, Vasant?
That's the easy thing.
Yeah.
Well, I posted a playful thought once, and it's just a playful thought, so don't take it as fact. I said, what if Bitcoin has been quietly fueling Ripple's infrastructure, acting as really the on-ramp where it transfers stored value into the liquidity networks being built by Ripple and others. It's just a thought, but, we've seen nefariousness in the ecosystem. So are we wrong? Maybe. But the other harsh reality of it is that it is being treated as exit liquidity for the debt markets. Okay. And it's also entirely possible that when this is all said and done later on down the road, maybe the Clarity Act will help. Maybe these regulations will. There's going to be a time and place for a decoupling of some sort. Maybe we can talk about that later. But Bitcoin holders, the ones holding it at the end, holding the bag, if you will, become the final buyers of government debt, basically absorbing toxic assets in exchange for the illusion of wealth.
Yeah.
Basically the last link in the broken chain.
So let's kind of theorize here for a second and structure a reset portfolio. Because I think a lot of people look at a portfolio built on, the whole idea of a barbell. You got your anchor, which could be gold. Does Bitcoin play a role? Does it XRP? Does Stellar come into this? How would you guys structure a reset portfolio as you're playing out the next 24 months here in this cycle?
Very easy. I think tier one, I have this on the Patreon, but it works for a lot of investors. It's worked for me, certainly. And I stick to what works. Physical sovereignty is so important to me. Anything outside the system. All right. We're living through rough times right now. You need some gold in your portfolio. It's monetary insurance. Can't be stolen. I mean, it can be stolen if you're not smart enough, but it can't be printed. It can't be hacked, et cetera, et cetera. Look what the institutions are doing. Follow their footsteps, only smaller. You need physical silver. Silver complements gold for many different reasons. Provides both a monetary hedge and an industrial value. Okay. And the demand is only increasing. You should have some silver. Get your cash outside of the bank. Banks use your money to play around, and they're making the same investments with your money sitting in a bank. And there will be bank runs later on. Tier two, you do need some strategic assets, long-term wealth, you could say, for utility. And I do encourage people to hold some XRP, XLM, HBAR, I think has its use case, SHX and VLO, and a few others.
Interesting. Okay.
And then you have a tier three asset tier 3 portfolio where you essentially, you get the most return on your investment in crypto. You know they're going to print money. All right. We didn't talk about the Fed cutting rates and all that nonsense. It's theatrics, but it justifies money printing, right?
Mhm.
And we're going to have to print so much money into 2026 to sustain all of this. And you're going to see a lot of liquidity go into the crypto ecosystem. And that ties us into Vindel's take about a short-lived bull market, if you will. And you need to use that to maximize as many profits as you can and rotate it back into hard.
Rotate it back into cores. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, Vendel, talk about that, because a short-lived bull market, this is a thesis that a handful of analysts have kind of been pointing to for 2026 and 27. Do you think that is the right timing for a potential short-lived bull market, especially if we start to see an accelerated rate cut cycle?
Yeah. So the way I'm looking at it is so simply put, we're at the late stages of the crypto market cycle. That's clear as day. We're at the late stages of the liquidity cycle as well. And essentially everything the Fed is doing are actually actions that they take as we head into deteriorating economy and recession. These are the actions they're taking. First of all, we have historical data to look back on and even compare what they're doing today to previous times and what happened afterwards. I'll give you one clear example. 2000, they started cutting rates. From the moment they started cutting rates, we had a 6 to 9 month window before we entered the dot-com bubble, markets crash, entered a recession. Today, in 2007, they started cutting rates. Within a 6 to 9 month window from the rate cuts, we went into the 2008 financial market, great financial crisis. Markets crashed, went into a recession. Interestingly, they started the official rate cutting cycle in September. We've had a few so far. And essentially, if you look at all the warning signals, they're kind of tapering on the edge, about to flash. So for example, high yield credit spreads, they're still relatively stable, but they look like they're about to spike up because of systemic stress. Then you look at the rate cuts going on, which is clearly a sign that the economy is not in such a good position. So they have to cut rates to stimulate the labor market. But in addition to that, you have the 10-year minus the 2-year yield curve that looks like it's about to accelerate upwards. And usually a lot of people think, oh, if the yield curve inverts, they start calling for a recession, but that's wrong. The recession warning signal is after it inverts and then reverts and accelerates to the upside. Now that's teetering on the edge as well too. So I anticipate it's going to happen very soon because it's ready to spike up. And if you actually zoom in closer on that, you got the 10-year minus the 3-month yield curve that's also ready to accelerate to the upside. So these are classic recession warning signals. Now, could it be overpowered by some, liquidity forces or some policies? Sure, maybe. But essentially, the way I'm looking at it now is they are cutting into a hard landing, and they don't want people to know that. Okay, we're seeing delinquency rates at record levels. We're seeing bankruptcies at record levels. We're seeing the economy deteriorating in real time. I mean, you don't have to watch the headlines to know what's going on. Just go ask your friend's mother, go to the grocery store, go to the dealership. You can see it in the real world, essentially. But layoffs are also at very high levels as well. And that's the reason why the government didn't want to release the job data, the labor market data. All right. They have to cover up how bad the real economy is. And that justifies why they're cutting rates. Because if the economy was so good, you don't cut rates, you raise rates. Okay. Yeah. And if the economy was so good, they wouldn't be filling in those gaps that are cracking in the system, which is the purchasing of $40 billion in treasury bills every month. That's what you do when the cracks are starting to show underneath in the system, excuse me.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing with the purchases of 40 billion in treasury bills every month is the precursor to the crisis that's coming. And then when the crisis happens, that's when real quantitative easing occurs. 2008, QE started, official QE. And that's not when they put, billions on the balance sheet. That's when they expand the balance sheet by trillions. And you only do that when all traditional conventional tools stop working. It's a last minute resort to save the system from collapsing. They did that QE in 2020, and they did it 2020 March, And they did it in 2008, December. And that's real QE. Now that hasn't happened yet. So the liquidity injections that they're doing, expanding their balance sheet, is a very slow defensive precursor that comes since the system is starting to crack, but it hasn't broken yet. But when it does break, that's when they're going to create some narrative headline to justify and cover up what's really happening. And then they're going to create some monumental balance sheet expansion, print trillions of dollars and save the system. And they'll blame it on some external factor. That's the game. That's what they're going to do. So in anticipation of that coming, which is inevitable, because the system is designed to seize up because it always cracks at some point. That's inevitable. It's coming. So the rate cuts that they're doing now tell me that they're cutting into a hard landing, but they are going to, this market, in my opinion, is going to rally into Q1, and then they're going to rug pull it.
Yeah, we've got the comparison you're talking about right on screen right now. This is 2008. We saw the downtrend actually occur in October, but you're right. Right there was the beginning. That was 07 as we started to flow, and then you kind of see right here as it flows into what was almost the end of 2008. So between 2007 and end of 2008, 2009, we start to see 58% come off the S&P 500. 58% come off the S&P 500. That was during that phase. Now, granted, this cycle that we had in 2020 was injected upon it with obvious reasons. You know, we know what that was, why we saw liquidity being poured into the system. But this round is a little different. What is the reason? Because every cycle seems to have a reason. You know, in 2008, it was the S&P, or excuse me, the savings and loan crash and the debacle for credit that is essentially exploded and flowed over into the markets. 2020, we know that the pandemic was pretty much the antithesis of that. Now, here we are in 26, which is really when this is going to happen. What is the event that would occur?
It's going to be a liquidity crisis, most likely. It's very difficult to say what the catalyst will be, but it's definitely going to be a liquidity crisis. That's what the data suggests. So
what do you say, Fursan?
I think it could be a number of things. Most likely it's going to be something geopolitical, and they're going to use all these mechanisms to justify what my brother just explained.
Yeah.
In my honest opinion, I really think this is all ultimately the reason for all of this is to divide the wealth even more. If you look at all the policies, like I said earlier, it's a bit theatrics at this point, the monetary policies. So I don't pay attention to that as much anymore. All I know is they're going to have to keep inflating the system. That's just how the debt-based system works.
How does this get through the social lens, though? I mean, you're talking about, it's already, I think, at the forefront. We're already starting to see social unrest because of the division of the society. If you look at this even further, which is what you're talking about, the only alternative to that would be one, I'm assuming a UBI, or something that would appease the population if we continue to see this wealth transfer occur. And at some point, I mean, is this a decade-long process, do you feel, or is this something that could be shrunk into a 5-year process before 2030?
I would say before 2030. I mean, this is all predictable. It really is. The outcome is so predictable. It's all about collapsing the fiat system, devaluing the dollar, and kind of pushing more and more people. First of all, pricing out the entire middle class, but pushing more people towards government assistance, welfare. And that's essentially what the UBI is. So they've already outlined the frameworks for all of this. That's the real core of the conversation.
Though, if you take out the middle class, who pays for it? Because right now the middle class essentially is supporting, I guess, to a certain extent, more, somewhat of the tax base. But in reality, if you can go out and just print, it doesn't really, you don't need a tax base. You're just printing.
I agree. But when you create money out of thin air and you play this policy game, right, with no transparency, no accountability, it's going to force the people to operate in an inflationary environment. That means more and more people are going to have to sell their assets just to survive. Who's buying those assets? It's the wealthy institutions. So I think it's the oldest trick in finance, what they're doing here. They're really trying to consolidate the wealth before unleashing this digital solution.
I want to take a minute, guys, and just invite you to join the Barron Market Edge private member group. You guys can do that by just clicking the link down in our description. This is your insider's edge to the AI and crypto money revolution, which is what we really focus on here on PBN. This is additional research that I do along with our team. We have a pretty significant team on our research around not only what guides our episodes, but a lot of that research gets built into more content that I drop here on the Bear and Market Edge. We do market trends and sentiment analysis, which can be anything from tokens to all sorts of strategies. This, of course, will also guide you over to our Telegram group, and we give this as elite community access. You get bonus content over there, including tax guides, as well as different kinds of asset guides out there that we drop all the time. This is your 10-year vision in action. All you have to do, of course, is just hit that little subscribe button or join the community and get in on it. It's absolutely free. It doesn't cost you a thing, so check it out.
Which essentially could be a CBDC or some sort of entity that, eventually controls all spending. And
yeah, I mean, there's a war on cash, Paul. There's a war on cash because there's a war on anonymity. And I think Palantir, the 5 technocrats out there, including Elon Musk, who I don't trust. I don't trust any of these technocrats, but I think they're at the forefront of all of this.
Okay, so we've kind of given you guys a little bit of an alignment on what kind of assets you should hold. Timing, we have also touched on. But when you look at overall strategies for building a base of your own operations, finance, location, obviously what will roll into just the physicality of how to deal with this new potential infrastructure going forward. I mean, it sounds very dystopian. Do you feel like it gets to that level, or do you feel like this will be dystopian in plain sight kind of thing, where we know it's all happening, but the rest of the world acts like nothing is happening, like, the Truman Show?
Yeah, I mean, when you look around the world, and like my brother said earlier, you don't have to read the headlines. You don't have to watch the news. If you just see what's happening to ordinary people, if you look at the genocide and all the other stuff that's happening around the world, it's very sad. So filter out the noise, connect the dots, and you start to understand the trajectory of where this is going. I think the strategy becomes very simple. You need to maintain exposure to hard assets, carefully selected digital technologies that are going to provide you in some real utility in an ecosystem you have no control over. Not to panic, don't get alarmed by volatility. That's just how markets are. But I don't know if there's going to be some savior, like people say. I don't believe that at all. I think it is indeed a totalitarian world order that's being formed here. You can disguise it and sugarcoat it any way you'd like.
Well, okay. So if you were giving tips outside of what we've talked about today in terms of lining up your own personal positioning, is there anything that you guys would say to someone that's just getting into this, that's really starting to understand it, of what you would say, hey, you need to do these 3 things right now?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah. So the first thing you need to do is not place any weight on what the headlines and the news say, because they're actually not designed to inform you, but they're actually designed to strategically misdirect you, mislead you, and manipulate you. So that's number 1. Don't trust headlines. Okay. It's a business. Number 2 is you have to get exposure to assets. You have to. It doesn't matter whether it's quality stocks, digital assets that actually will be more relevant in the future, with good tokenomics, real utility, some precious metals in your portfolio, because historically they have outlived every currency reset for the last 4,000 years. It's clearly a hedge against currency debasement. It's an insurance against monetary currency debasement. It's smart to have some precious metals, gold or silver, as wealth preservation, not as an investment to make a return on, but to preserve your wealth if you have wealth that you don't need tomorrow.
Well, yeah, and you're completely avoiding the almost 7% deflationary situation that we're facing right now, already in terms of inflation, plus what we're seeing in terms, and a lot of people don't really understand, inflation is accumulative over time. So it just continues to get worse.
Yeah, inflation actually never will ever go away. It doesn't go away. A lot of people think inflation is the definition of prices rising. Inflation is actually the rate at which prices rise. So when the Fed says, hey, we got inflation down to 1%, you shouldn't pat them on the back, because prices are still rising, just at a slower rate. Currency debasement is the real devil here, and that's built into the system. And There's no way around it except to own assets that actually outperform the monetary base. The monetary base is between 8 to 10%. So if you're holding a bond giving you 4 or 5%, or you're in maybe an index fund giving you 10%, on average, you're essentially breaking even. You're not significantly outpacing the rate of currency debasement in the real world. And I always tell people this, that traditional investment strategies and portfolios that were once effective 30 years ago are not as effective today because of the rate of currency debasement and the monetary base from central banks and money printing. So you have to evolve your strategies to preserve your wealth and to get ahead financially. And we believe, based on the research and the data suggests this, that the most asymmetric bet that you can make today is actually digital assets and cryptocurrencies. But the key is identifying the ones that will actually transfer over into the new system and appreciate in value because they'll be more relevant. That's the key. And that's a skill within itself, because there's like 36 million cryptocurrencies. And that's what they try to do. The headlines divert your attention so that you come in at the top and they use you as exit liquidity to get out, and then they go buy real assets. Yeah, you have to be aware of this, but the key is get some exposure to investments every week, every 2 weeks, if you can. Invest in something and just get started. Just get started in something you understand. But it depends on what your financial goal is in the short term and in the long term. Because if you're in the short term, you're focused on making the most amount of wealth in the shortest period of time, then that asymmetric bet is going to be digital assets and cryptocurrency.
For sure.
If you're focused on preserving what you have, then it's going to be quality stocks that will be here in the future, gold, precious metals, maybe some real estate. But don't expect to outpace currency debasement with that.
It's important to play both. You need to play defense and offense at the same time.
Well, that's a good statement right there, I think, Versan, is defensive positions in investing are usually taken during hard times and by most people, as opposed to the aggressive position that you should be taking, which is the acceleration of buying assets at their lowest value and then writing those out. But again, it gets into the point that you're talking about, and that, do people have that ability? Even if you don't have the ability to buy into a down market, you probably have a certain set of a nest egg or something that you do have the ability to deal with. And I'm not saying anybody should go out there and put their nest egg on anything.
Mm-hmm.
Not financial advice. The point is that there's probably an allocation amount that you can feel, if I lost this, it wouldn't hurt me. Yeah. But if I can take advantage of this in these times, the potential upside on this is long-term. If they're thinking, in a much more conservative, position.
Absolutely. I'd like to share something with your audience. This is not financial advice, but whenever I buy something these days, I factor in inflation. I really do. Mm-hmm. Kind of how fast is the currency being debased based on how much money we have to print to sustain it.
Yep.
And that's kind of how I look at things when I make investments nowadays. There is a potential opportunity. For instance, if you're factoring inflation with how much are you getting for your dollars? SHX. That's a digital asset. It has real utility. It's been endorsed by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Bill Gates Foundation, which is probably not the best news, but you have a large amount of institutions, including IBM and MIT, who are backing this technology. It has a real use case built on the Stellar network. It's like 0.0 something right now.
Example. Stellar on this week, so that'll be interesting to hear what they have to say.
Ask them about SHX, but that's an example. It's so cheap, but it has a utility. It has a use case. I think there's going to be a time and place for it. That's an opportunity for people, not financial advice. But if you're factoring in inflation, you're getting a lot for your dollars compared to buying XRP at $2 and waiting for it to hit $10. Your return on investment would be better with SHX. So for the people out there who don't have a lot of resources financially,
the risk appetite is there.
There you go. That's a better opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you have a risk appetite. Guys, it's been good chatting with you again today. Always love kind of diving into this. Sometimes, though, I look at this and I think many people will listen to a podcast and they say, gosh, what a bleak outlook. And I'm like, no, your knowledge is opening you up to prepare for that. That is the greatest thing that could happen.
Empowering.
Is to be prepared for these kind of issues that happen. So don't look at it as a bad bad news.
Yeah, people
Exactly.
think, doom and gloom. I've seen the comments before, and
Yeah.
they have no idea. We are so optimistic, and we live life fruitfully, you could say. We're very positive. We're just realistic.
Yeah. You kind of have to be that at this point. Guys, you know what to do. Make sure and drop over to Black Swan Capitalist on YouTube. I'll drop a link down below. We'll show you guys that on screen here as well. They do a great job on their website and over on the YouTube channel in terms of really learning a little bit more about what is going on. I will give you one thing. Go watch the Tom Longo episode. I think that's a good one. I watched it over the weekend, so it was a good one to listen to, Versan.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I love to get a unique take from everybody else. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was great.
Well, this guy's been around in the market for quite some time, and his take on what we're dealing with around a global reset, which is similar to what we've been talking about. It's an interesting one for sure. So you guys should check it out. Anyway,
his view on the dollar was
great.
Interesting. Yeah.
What's that?
His view on the U.S. dollar was.
The U.S. dollar. Yeah.
People have to listen to it though.
It was good. Anyway, you guys know what to do. Make sure and like and subscribe. We'll catch you next time right here on the XRP Pod. Take care.
Thank you, Paul.